Now, here is Ticky Fullerton on Your Money.
Hello there, I'm Ticky Fullerton, every night bringing you a full hour of the very best in business coverage across the nation and internationally, especially where business and politics meet. Coming up on the show, Julie Bishop Uncensored, my interview with the outgoing MP on women in politics, international relations, her legacy as Foreign Minister, and what next for Australia's hugely popular politician. Myer delivers a boost for shareholders after today's interim results. Is the worst over for the department store? Well, the Australian senior business reporter and close Myer follower Eli Greenblat gives us his verdict. And Huawei chairman John Lord on his roller coaster year at the tech telco. A 5G ban in Australia, yes, but prizes for tech know-how at Barcelona. What should we think of the controversial business? Well, yes, she is the it girl for International Women's Day week. Former Foreign Minister, the Honourable Julie Bishop, wearer of red shoes, sparkly gold shoes, and today, black patent stilettos with red patent hearts, speaking to a packed room at the Australian British Chamber of Commerce's lunch about her remarkable career so far. 20 years as a top litigator, 20 years as a politician, so what next? Julie Bishop agreed to a pretty interesting in-conversation with me after her speech. Everything from political fallout, how to get women back into politics, to what offers she might just take up this year. Julie Bishop, I want to ask you first about Brexit. Here we are at the British Chamber. You had a very close bond, obviously, with a former Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson. We are hurtling our way towards March the 29th. What do you think is going to happen?
I also formed a great friendship with Jeremy Hunt, Boris's successor as Foreign Minister, and they were on the opposite sides of the debate. And this is the extraordinary situation that within one party, or within all parties, but within the governing party, there are such divergent views on the issue fundamentally, should Britain remain in the EU or should it exit, but also on how they will implement the referendum outcome, which was to exit the EU. I'm as confused as anyone else as to how this is going to occur. Presumably, there will have to be some kind of transition period, but currently it's no deal.
Do you think
that's
a delay?
Off the table.
It's on the table. Do you think a delay of some sort is inevitable?
I just can't imagine how that date in March, end of March, can come and go with nothing being negotiated. Now, I'm very well aware from conversations within the EU that there are some nations who will not make it easy for Britain to leave, and they are certainly sending a message to the other members of the EU, don't try what Britain has done.
Well, very interestingly, overnight we've had Emmanuel Macron. He's released this missive about the possibility of, come the European Parliament elections, not to be influenced by any outsiders, not to get in the way of really his European project. He talks again about this idea, possibly of actually having Brussels being in charge, perhaps of organising how democratic elections are funded, this sort of stuff. I mean, this is the stuff that Britain...
Boris will use that in his playbook, because that's precisely the kind of issue that has concerned a majority of Britons, that they were being governed from Brussels. And for Macron to produce a suggestion that there be some kind of European agency to oversee national elections will play very well for the Brexiteers.
I'm struck by the fact that both yourself and Boris Johnson, you're both former foreign ministers, you both would have loved a moment leading the country. I think possibly Boris
wanted it a lot more than me.
You reckon?
I suggest you read Boris's book on Winston Churchill, because actually the subtitle should be What Winston Churchill Would Think of Boris Johnson. And I think Boris sees the parallels, that in Britain's time of need, it will turn to the great man.
Have you spoken to him since you retired?
We've been in contact.
Look, you've, since we spoke 9 months ago, a few things have changed. You've got a bit off your chest in the last week or so. You could have beaten Bill Shorten.
Well, why on earth would you stand in a leadership ballot of a political party if you didn't think you had a shot at winning the election? I mean, presumably Peter Dutton thought that he had the ability to beat Bill Shorten. You don't stand for election to a leadership role on the basis that I'm going to lose the next election for you. That doesn't actually wash.
And so Christopher Pyne's position that, well, maybe, maybe not, but you couldn't have beaten Greg Hunt.
Well, my point was obvious. I had to get the backing of the party room to beat Bill Shorten. I didn't get the backing of the party room. That's fine. It's an election. The majority in the party room rules. And so there's hardly anything exceptional or extraordinary or controversial by saying I stood in a leadership ballot because I believed I could beat Bill Shorten. I wasn't given that opportunity. Fine, move on. So, you know, when you say I'm speaking my mind, I think I'm stating the bleeding obvious.
Julie, in your retirement speech, you said the coalition will win the next election. Ministers are jumping ship. Christopher Pyne, Steve Ciobo most recently. Can the Prime Minister now win the election?
Absolutely. I believe that the coalition will win the next election. I would have been more concerned about leaving had I thought we were going to lose to Labor, but I'm confident that we will win the next election and Scott Morrison will continue on as Prime Minister. Josh Frydenberg's about to hand down a budget which will show a surplus for the first time in 10 years. For the first time in 10 years, we're starting to pay down Labor's debt. The economic indicators are all heading in the right direction. Unemployment is at about 5%. On the issue of national security and border protection, Labor have been found wanting. Those two fundamental issues, economic security and national security, are what a federal government is all about.
Screamed across the fin today is that Bill Shorten is going to run this election on the issue of wages.
Well, the trouble with Labor is that they can't manage the economy. They've shown that time and time again. I mean, it's like Groundhog Day. You get them back in and they raise taxes, which hurts business. They run up debt on wasteful programs. And their economic management skills are appalling. You can't pay for the services that Australians need if you're running the country on a credit card. And so I believe that the Australian people will see that in difficult economic times globally, you stick with the best economic managers to drive economic growth, to build more cohesive societies, to lift standards of living. And that's the coalition.
Julie, you love the Liberal Party. You talked about it as your beloved Liberal Party. You love a lot of things. I notice you've got hearts on your shoes today. Pretty snappy. Your beloved Liberal Party, what shape will it be in if the coalition loses? I mean, some say the right will be decimated.
I don't want to even speculate on the coalition losing the next election. There's far too much at stake. But of course, if any side loses an election, they go into opposition. I've been there. It's a pretty dismal place. But it is also an opportunity to rebuild. And we certainly did that in 2007. And we came up with policies. I mean, some of my best foreign policies were developed in opposition. But I'm not contemplating that for the coalition.
You now famously were asked if you believed the Liberal Party would ever bring itself to elect a popular female leader, and you said, quote, "When we find one, I am sure we will. Now, if I might say so, that's classic Julie Bishop sort of remark.
Self-evident, again, stating the obvious.
So you say no to quotas, I think, and you're not keen on quotas or targets, really.
I believe in targets, absolutely.
Because you talk about this critical mass of women that's needed.
Yes, but you see, I've seen the negative side of quotas, where you have to appoint a woman to a role because of a quota, not because she's the best person for it. Now, targets can have a similar effect, but not the perverse outcomes. And I don't know one woman that wants to stand up in the Parliament and say, I am here because they were forced under a quota system to pre-select me. Women want to be there because I'm the best person for the job. Now, we've introduced targets into government appointments. In the Turnbull Cabinet, we decided to aim for 50% of all government board appointments would be female. And that just means ministers are held to account for the names that they put forward. There are about 4,000 or 5,000 government board positions, which is a lot. And when a minister would come into Cabinet with a list of names for a particular position, if there were no women on that list, they would be asked to go and find some, and that's my point. The women are there. You just got to dig a little bit deeper. And by the time,
well, that's what you seem to have done with Curtin, for example.
By the time I left Cabinet, 44% of government positions were held by women, and in the case of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, it was about 50%. We can do it through targets.
Well, there are 11 women, I think, in the 11 women MPs in the House of Reps of 58, right? So the Liberal targets at the moment.
Absolutely, and that's why the Prime Minister and other ministers have said that we must improve the female representation in the Parliament. It's got to better reflect the composition of society, and as I've been indicating, women's voices are needed around the decision-making tables. So we have an opportunity in this election to pre-select a number of women. I know that a number have already been pre-selected in my...
But that's going to happen writ large in seats, isn't it?
It will take time. It will be incremental, but as long as the trajectory is heading in that right direction, currently it's not, so as long as the trajectory is heading in the right direction, we will have a critical mass of women, and that's why the program I talked about, Emergent Women, is long-term, but nevertheless, we have to do it.
I wanted to ask you about these growing number of female independents. So Karen Phelps, Julia Banks, Rebecca Sharkey, Cathy McGowan, we see them all clubbed together there. Going back to your point, 1998, Harvard, you wanted to be part of the national debate, national issues. These women, all independents, they will never be a minister. None of them will ever be a foreign minister or a minister. What is the point? I mean, how long can they think they're Brian Harradine?
Well, to be fair, there are a number of male independents on the crossbenches, Andrew Wilkie, Bob Catter and Adam Batt.
But this is the way women are going. They're going off to independence because they're jacked off.
Perhaps they believe that they can make a difference outside of the Cabinet.
Can they really?
Well, some, if the numbers in the Parliament are so tight that their vote can determine legislation, they are having an impact. That's always been the challenge with independents. I won my seat of Curtin off an independent back in 1998. So,
but is this the fate of women in politics?
I don't believe so at all. I think in the case of the four women, they were Liberal-leaning, they were centre-right, all of them, and yet they didn't see an opportunity to, or they had an opportunity and chose to withdraw, to be in a major party. Now, Labor have had a close call with one of their members that could have gone to the female members that could have gone to the crossbench. But you're absolutely right. In my mind, if you truly want to make a difference, you aim to be in Cabinet. But in their own way, they are influencing legislation and policy. If there is a much more decisive win for the coalition at the next election, or if the other side got there, a much more decisive win and their numbers don't count on the House of Representatives, well then they'll have to make their mark in another way. But the Senate is likely to be close for a very long time. And so, you know, negotiations with crossbenchers will continue in the Senate.
Julie Bishop, what next for Julie Bishop? You asked the question yourself and teased us in your answer. I note that almost the compliments that came upon your retirement were almost more from Labour than they were from the coalition. Bill Shorten called you a formidable opponent. I want to ask you, would you rule out a posting or appointment by a new Labour government?
My plan is to go back to the private sector, and I'm a Member of Parliament until the day the election is called. And so I'm playing it absolutely by the book. I'm not entertaining any offers or options until such time as I am private citizen Julie Bishop.
So can I take that as a no, that were there a Labour government, you would not rule out a posting or appointment from Labour?
This is like being grilled by the press gallery on will you rule out, will you rule in? And you know politicians don't play that game. Ask me again when I'm a private citizen and I don't have to play the rule in, rule out game.
You mentioned Alexander Downer there, also a Foreign Secretary. He's at High Commission in London. I'm just thinking what it would be like for you to stare down Vladimir Putin from Washington.
I think the Labour Party have made their views known on political appointments. I think they've made that quite clear.
Yeah, but I mean, if they put you in Washington, they'd be able to say, no, we're not stacking anywhere over here. Look at Julie Bishop in Washington.
Is that what goes on?
Look, I've run out of time, Julie Bishop. I would like to finish by asking you one thing. Your proudest moment as Foreign Minister, was it the stare after MH17 with Vladimir Putin?
That was an extraordinary experience. I recommend it to anyone. It was a moment, but there were many very special moments in my time as Foreign Minister. It is such an immense honour to have the opportunity to represent Australia, a nation that is so highly regarded around the world. And I had that privilege for 5 years. There are many events, many memories, and I will treasure them all.
Julie Bishop, great privilege to talk to you. Thank you very much.
What about Washington? I wonder. After the break, investors clearly stoked with today's Myer results. We'll get the details with the Australian's Eli Greenblat next.
You're watching Ticky on Your Money. Now, back to Ticky.
Yes, welcome back. Now, everybody's been waiting for how Myer has been faring. A weak retail environment is impacting, clearly. Total sales down nearly 3% over the first half of the year. But the market reacted pretty positively as the company swings back to profit, and the sales decline actually slowed. Net profit coming in at 3.1%, $41.3 million. Myer shares closing up over 10%. Well, for more on the result, the Australian senior business reporter Eli Greenblat joins me live from Melbourne. Well, much happier news for Ian King there, Eli.
No.
You there?
I think it is some good news to John King and his management team, yes, and I think it's going very well for Myer for the moment, and I think he's bought some time for the board led by Gary Hounsell. The result was not as bad as feared, it wasn't as worse as it could have been, given we saw David Jones come out with some pretty bad results just last month. And I think what's happened is that John King has bought himself some time for his transformation and bought some time for the board.
Have we got a real window now on what the strategy actually is and what seems to be working?
Well, I think for the moment there's a bit of a partial window. So John King wants to lift the sales of Myer exclusive brands. So these are the kind of in-store private label brands that Myer owns. He wants to lift that from around 17.5% to 20%. But then keep it at around that so that Myer still is a house of real kind of brands. So he's been very busy overseas trying to secure deals to bring in some really on-trend, hot offshore brands from Europe, from the UK, bring them into Myer. He wants to really refit some of the stores. So certainly Myer has got too many stores around the country, but what John King seems to be saying is it's not about closing down stores and getting out of leases, it's about using the space he has a lot better, using that space in a more economical and productive way. And that involves talks with landlords, which he's doing right now. He said today that those talks are very productive, and I think you'll see Myer kind of shrink its space within its stores, but still keep those stores and use those stores better, kind of shifting around the categories and really using the space to sell more profitably.
Eli, I always ask you about Solomon Lew, because Premier Investments obviously got a big, or Solomon Lew's got a big interest in what's happening with Myer. He was always very supportive of or open to John King and this strategy, even if he's not the same with Gary Hansel and the board. Have you had any feedback from him as to, because a lot of this would seem to be sort of Solly's strategy?
You would think so, and you're right, Ticky. The result came out, the Myer result came out about 7 hours ago, and still no word from Solly Lew. He's being very quiet. So, you know, we're waiting for his kind of press release, his announcement, but nothing. And I'm not sure if there's a lot to really attack in this result. And I think you're right, he's been quite supportive in John King in terms of he hasn't attacked him publicly. He saved that for the board, and particularly for Gary Hansel, who he's called a whole range of things, which I suppose I won't repeat now, but he's really savaged Gary Hansel in the last year or so. Being quite supportive in John King in terms of he said nothing about him, nothing negative, but the Myer result came out 7 hours ago. Nothing from Solly Lew's camp as yet. The share's up, 17%. Solly is, through Premier Investments, Myer's biggest shareholder, so he's benefiting from that. But we'll see, I suppose, maybe in the next few days, is if he tries to pick apart the results.
Because interestingly, I mean, I know he has often pinpointed these leases as being the absolute millstone around Myer at the moment. So by John King going back to attack, to try and do something with this leasing problem would seem to be, priority number one.
Yes, and that is the problem. A lot of these leases are very long-dated leases. Myer is stuck in there for, 5, 10, 15 years, and the landlords aren't about to give them a free ride and a free exit. So the cost to exit those leases is so high, it's so prohibitive, they just can't do it. So they're stuck there. So then it's about talking to those landlords to use the space more productively, to do negotiations where maybe they can give up some of the space and the landlords can then rent out that space maybe to a supermarket or a specialty store. But, certainly Solly Lew's been very critical, but there's not really much else anyone can do. It's not as though even a genius or even some kind of property expert could go into Myer and lead it and then get out of those leases. They are stuck there for the moment.
Briefly, do you think this is the turnaround, the beginning of the turnaround for Myer? Has it got through rock bottom?
I think there's a glimmer of light. I think the result was a lot better than some feared, especially going towards Christmas. The second half sales were down 2.5%, but in the second quarter, so the weeks around Christmas, that sales fall decelerated and sales were kind of negative only 0.9%. Now that's still down, but in this market it's actually pretty good. There wasn't any kind of warning or downgrade for the first few months of January and February, so for 2019. So I think in this market, given how tough it is, that result was pretty good. So it looks like maybe what John King is doing maybe is working, but I think we have to see the full year results to see some real long-term impact. But at the moment, it's looking slightly positive.
Eli Greenblat, great to have you talk us through that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so a really interesting startup launched today, Household Capital. It's a new retirement funding product which claims to allow homeowners to access additional retirement funds by using low interest rate loans to transfer a portion of the value of their home into their super. Now, Household Capital says it fills a gap in the market for those baby boomers without enough cash in their super. Remember, those ones who haven't actually been doing the compulsory super contributions for years and years and years, for them to fund their retirement, but with equity in their home, estimated to be worth around $900 billion in Australia. And it's not a reverse mortgage, they say. The new company is chaired by former Labor Minister for Superannuation, Nick Sherry, and its CEO is venture capitalist Joshua Funder. Chief Business reporter Leo Shanahan spoke with Joshua Funder about today's launch.
Joshua Funder, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Leo.
Now, look, for starters, people would want to understand how Household Capital works and how it differs from other products on the market, like a reverse mortgage, for instance.
So, there's several big differences about how we go about it. Legally, we do take a mortgage on the house, and that falls well within the existing consumer protections for loans you make when you don't need to repay them monthly, you pay them at the end. So the full protections are there, but it's very different in a number of key ways. Firstly, we've restructured the way wholesale debt works, and that means we can come out with a cheaper and more efficient rate. And that's important because we're already well lower than where the banks were before they pulled out of the market. The second thing is to make sure that the customer experience of accessing their home equity to fund their retirement is very different than before. We use software and new approaches to meet the customer's needs, understand them, and help them meet their own retirement needs with their own money. And finally, we make sure that people look after their long-term needs and can have in place planning. That involves working with superannuation funds to top up super. It involves working with retirement advisors who have a best interest test for the customer to make sure their long-term needs are met. So from end to end, there are big differences in the way we're going about it.
Now, let's talk about demand, because obviously you think there is a hole in the market for this. Obviously, the amount of equity people have in their home is enormous in Australia, hundreds of billions or something, from what I understand. Where did you start to form this idea, and where do you think the most demand is going to be?
So I started to form this idea looking at the policy needs of Australians in retirement and making sure we could recognise that Australians now have to plan for 30 years in retirement. Now, we should celebrate that. That's a success that our country has delivered to Australians.
Well, we're living.
We're living. But at the same time, we need to make sure they've got financial adequacy and good housing to enjoy their retirement. And the gap for baby boomers in Australia is this. They got superannuation only halfway through their careers and at 3%. So now that they're at retirement or in retirement, it means that the superannuation isn't enough to get them through 30 years on top of the pension for most people. At the same time, Australian baby boomers bought their homes 40 years ago, and by the time they get to the retirement, the median home is worth more than $700,000. The median household superannuation is only worth $200,000. So Australian baby boomers, as a household, have saved almost $1 million, but they don't have access to most of it in order to fund their own retirement. So all told, you're right, there's $1 trillion of home equity that Australians already own and have saved in their homes. And our very simple approach is to make sure they have access to part of that home equity to complement the funding that's available for them to draw on throughout the course of 30 years of retirement, to help that retirement be active and to improve their well-being throughout retirement.
All right, so who are your partners in this, banking-wise? And does this work for all superannuation funds, or is it limited to certain types of funds? I notice you're working closely with industry funds.
No, it's a very broad approach.
Right.
People have a variety of needs. Some need to boost their super. Others need to pay off a mortgage at retirement. For other people, their super's okay, but they've got to renovate their house so they can live there happily for 30 years. If others have got their income and housing, they might want to give to their kids for first home buyers deposits or their grandchildren for school fees. So each individual retiree has a different mix of needs. For many retirees, though, the overriding need is they need more resources and access to their own savings to fund it. In terms of who we work with, we're working with financial advisors whose clients are running out of money and need to access more funding for retirement. We're working with super funds who often see retirees leave the fund or cash out their super because it's inadequate. Instead, those members of a fund, and it could be retail, it could be state government funds, it could be industry, could instead have incoming capital to support their superannuation and make it last the journey. So it's really, the important thing is people plan for the long term and they responsibly use their own home equity to meet their own needs. Those are the key things we're putting in place, and we can work with a range of partners to make it happen.
Where do you stand from a regulatory perspective? I guess in this kind of post-Hayne environment, people are asking, well, who's actually regulating these guys? How do they work? Are they a financial product? Do they work with ASIC? Do they work with APRA? How does that work?
So look, we're not a regulated bank, so we don't work with APRA. We work under ASIC, and ASIC's focus is consumer protection. But what we've noticed in the last year as we've been developing this product and now that we're live on market is our approach didn't need to change in reaction to the Royal Commission, and it had a widespread review of broking, financial advice, banking and superannuation. We also saw, partway through last year, the federal budget brought out a pension loan scheme. And that was really a federal government endorsing the role of home equity in funding retirement, not in consuming your equity, making sure you plan for the long term. And thirdly, from a regulatory point of view, it's important to note that ASIC itself put out a review of the legislation that covers home equity access in October. It meant that the regulations don't need to change, but what they observed is that if you use home equity to consume things in the short term, you often get left short in the long term. So what you need to focus on is long-term use of your home equity. So the regulatory environment's relatively settled for what we do, unlikely to change, but our approach doesn't challenge any of the regulatory settings at the moment. We work well back from the limits that are imposed, and we work well within the consumer protections to deliver those to customers.
Tomorrow, we'll actually talk to the Chair of Household Capital, Nick Sherry, who was the former Labour Super Minister. He's been in the super field now for a couple of decades, and a very interesting take on super in Australia and internationally. Well, Chinese tech company Huawei has spent the past year trying to convince the Western world that it needs the telco producer. Yesterday came other news that it will be suing the US government over a recent ban on Huawei products for US federal agencies. Already, Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou, daughter of the founder, is suing personally the Canadian government for detaining and searching her before her official arrest. Underpinning the concerns of Western governments is Huawei's connection to the Chinese government. Well, the Australian government banned the telco from joining the 5G network in August last year. So what comes next? Long-serving Huawei Australia chairman John Lord was in Sydney and put the company's position to me. John Lord, it's very nice to have you here in Sydney. Now, we've just heard news that Huawei globally is actually set to sue the US government this week over its decision to ban Huawei and ZTE.
Well, I've only heard the news like you, Ticky, to be honest, and at the moment it is only media rumours. Yes. No official statement out of the company, but I understand from the media rumours that they're looking at a particular amendment to the Defence Act that kept Huawei and other Chinese makers' phones out of the US Defence Department. So
we've got that potential action. We've also got the Huawei CFO, the one that was arrested in Canada, personally suing the Canadian government. We've in recent weeks had that big speech from the founder, Ren Zhengfei, who says Huawei, the world needs Huawei, the US cannot crush Huawei. What is your reaction to how sort of proactive now Huawei is being globally?
Well, I think it's a company, I said this many years ago, and it comes across that way. It's a company that has grown so fast, it's learning how to be a truly large corporate player. And it's realised that you can't sit back and let people continually throw accusations at you. You've got to defend yourself. We in Australia have been defending ourselves for some time, as you're well aware, and so are the viewers. But Huawei has been silent, thinking their technology and delivering the goods would win the case. And they're finding that the world's not quite like that.
So you were quite shocked when the full ban on 5G came through in Australia, weren't you?
I was. Well, at the start of the year, I wasn't so shocked because there was starting to be rumours that the US had been talking to Australia about keeping us out. But we'd started talking to people. I'd started briefing ministers and different organisations, had discussions with the intelligence agencies in Canberra, and we were hopeful that we would be included in 5G to the same extent as 4G, that is, in the non-core operation. So the actual ban in that week, which was an absolute chaotic week in Canberra, was very disappointing. And shocking, no, it was more disappointing for me because Australia is once again not going to have the competition it deserves.
Interesting that the ban on Huawei in Australia seems to be even stronger than the ban in some other Five Eyes countries. Why is this, and what is the difference? Well, the
difference is at the moment that Australia is the only Five Eyes that has totally banned Huawei from 5G.
Is that right?
That is correct. Over in New Zealand, the New Zealand intelligence agencies late last year made the call, but I notice the Prime Minister is still saying they will make a decision in the New Zealand government's interest. So they've still got to make a final decision. Over in the UK, there's a very open and I think a very good debate going on about how you include technology from non-familiar players, that is not Europe or US, but from Asia, China.
You've just been in Europe.
I have, last week. And there's a good debate going on there about how you need to include them to make your country competitive within a security assurance framework.
Right. Well, why? Let me hit you with the obvious question, which is why shouldn't we, in this era of people stealing technology left, right, and centre? That's what the basis of the trade war between America and the Chinese is about. Why, when we've got a lot of shifting sands with geopolitics in the regions here, why shouldn't our national security be very high in mind when we're looking at involving a Chinese company for our new 5G network?
Ticky, it should be. It always is a major consideration. Just governments are paid to make decisions in the national interest. And Huawei and John Lord has no difficulty with that at all. And that's what they should be doing. But the national interest is just broader than a pure security debate or a pure ban. National interest is defence, it's intelligence and security, but it's the economy. And it's also making sure your country is actually competitive. Now, I would argue that in the NBN, because of lack of players, not having one of the biggest players in the world and the best in Huawei, we did not end up with the best NBN in the world.
But is it a safe one from our point of view in terms of national security? I mean,
I would argue it would have been safe with Huawei there. And this is where Australia's, I think, needs to have this debate and needs to get a framework of security assurance around these technologies.
Why do you think they were so quick to jump on the full ban, the Australian government?
Well, there were many reasons for Australia making that decision at about that time. And to jump on the full ban, I'm not sure of all their reasons. In fact, there's only been that one press release on the day and a couple of statements by the Foreign Affairs Minister since. I have had no written communication that we're banned or any further discussion with the government. But
so you're not working on any movement to align you with the position that other countries have, for example?
No.
So you're just sitting with this full ban? Yeah.
Well, we are, and we're working with our partners, the companies that we provide equipment to, still, because 4G is here to stay for a long time yet, and we're still delivering that 4G. So we're working with them and also restructuring ourselves on the assumption that we're not allowed to be in 5G.
But it does curb you a bit. You say you've got ongoing business with 4G, but, you know, the world is moving on.
It is.
And those presumably, those contracts, that business, the real growth is 5G, Huawei and other parts of the world. This is going to cramp your style in Australia, isn't it?
Most certainly in the short to medium term. I mean, I am optimistic in that as we start to roll out 5G, and it's not going to be a rapid rollout, it'll start faster phones initially, but the real big 5G developments in industry are going to be over 5-10 years. I would hope that Australia sees down the track it is falling behind other countries all around the world and is not becoming competitive because it does not have the best technology and enough competition in the 5G rollout.
What do you make of this argument that actually there's as much a trade war dispute going on in terms of the 5G decisions as there is a national security one? Huawei maintains that their products are better, they are more innovative, and this is America having dropped the ball with their big tech, missing out and trying to muscle Huawei out.
I think that is part of the play. The actual trade war between the US and China is a matter for big countries to play. But Huawei being included in that is part of this play, this surprise, I think, to the Americans, how far they are behind. They do not have any players in 5G. The three big players are Huawei, Ericsson and Nokia. All three of those companies manufacture in China. And we are the three that are needed to make a strong 5G. The three of us were needed to make a very strong and good NBN. You need competition. And it's not just competition in price. It's competition in technology. And it's not Huawei that says we're ahead in 5G. The technical community is saying we're somewhere between 12 months and 2 years ahead.
So you won, I see the Huawei Mate Pro success at the World Congress the other day. That's the other part of your business in Australia. How's the mobile business? How's that going?
That is going very well. We've snuck into number 3 in consumers in Australia. But the products we're producing now are equal to the best coming out of the other companies. Now, we weren't in that position 2 years ago. We are now. And you're seeing people take those up. That's a different market, I know, but it's a key part of our 3 business groups, which is consumer, the networks, which is the 5G, and then the other one is the enterprise. And that's the growing business for all of us in the future. That's connecting businesses, finding these business solutions and applying them through Internet of Things and all those good technologies.
And you think the Australian government will be comfortable with you being involved in that part of the network?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, definitely all encouragement so far. I mean, Prime Minister Julia Gillard, when she kept us out of the NBN, 12 months later met with myself and the chairwoman of Huawei, Madam Sun, and encouraged us to stay in Australia and keep bringing technology.
So what is HQ, what are the Huawei chiefs now, what's the message down to you at the moment?
The message down to me is, John, we're staying in Australia, continue to grow the business. We know you have difficulties with 5G and in the network, but you have our support to grow the business in Australia.
Why?
And that's good.
I should ask you, why do you do it? You've been, I mean, it must be an incredibly difficult chair. You've given up other roles to sort of focus more. I know John Brumby has recently resigned, so he must have been a great support for you.
He was.
You know, 7.5 years. Why do you do it? Is it? I mean, are they paying you bucket loads of money? Or?
No, I haven't had a pay rise for 7.5 years, in fact. But no. Why am I doing it? I joined because of that excitement of the technology and bringing it into Australia. And I really still do believe that. I'm still here now for 2 major reasons. I think Australia still needs to welcome these types of technologies, to grow our SMEs, putting back into the global supply chains. Australia is underrepresented on global supply chain inputs to companies like ours and our competitors. And the only way we're going to grow that is to have companies like Huawei invest here, trade here, and grow the global supply chain links. That's the first one. The second one, we have 750 employees who are very proud of Huawei working in Australia. They're Australian nationals and residents, and I'm also helping them.
And do you feel a political pawn?
No, I don't feel a political pawn. I think there's been a lot of influence applied to Australia by the US, and we've seen in the last 2 weeks very senior representatives of the US go around to countries all around the world saying, don't use Huawei or else. I think it's very sad when a country has decided to pick on one company. And I think, to give him his credit, President Trump said, we should not be banning technologies where we're not in front. We should be growing our own technology.
Do you think that's really what he feels, though?
Well, he tweets a lot, and people say he tweets what he really feels, and that upsets more people. But that was his quote, and I fully believe in that. It's a competitive world.
So finally, do you worry that given the tensions around IT, this Cold War that people talk about in technology between China and the US, is that going to impact Huawei even more, do you think?
Well, I don't think it can impact any more than it is now. I think there's some good debates going on. I think we will see Europe probably take a more practical way ahead in that they realise to have the best technologies, to have competition, to stay competitive, you need to embrace these technologies within that framework I talk about. The worry for me is Australia. Some people have said, some politicians and some think tanks in Canberra, we can accept a 30% increase in price if we don't use Huawei and NBN, which is a figure quoted quite widely by study by us and also overseas. Australia can't afford to start 30%. I don't know what business likes to start 30% behind its competitors and get in front.
But one comes back to this issue that it's not so much a Huawei thing, but the rules are in China that if the Chinese government chose to command that Huawei use their expertise and their networks for the benefit of Chinese interests over other nations, then it would be compelled to do so.
2 points on that, Ticky. The first one is we have legal advice from a very senior law firm in China which says the Chinese government cannot direct us to put backdoors or any of that into our equipment. We've had that supported by Clifton Chance, the lawyers out of UK. I think
Clifford Chance,
Clifton Chance, they're in the top 10 of the world. They've supported that opinion in writing to us. So, and that says we cannot be forced to do such things. Huawei doesn't carry the information, it's the telcos that do. We provide the infrastructure. You can put checks and balances in for backdoors, holes. None of us make perfect equipment, so in fact it's a good check anyway. Everyone should be doing it. So you can put measures in place that stop any influence. Huawei and Ren Zhengfei, the founder, said only 2 weeks ago, we will not give any information, we will not do anything to hurt our customers worldwide. And we've stayed by that belief ever since I've been watching the company for the last 7.5, 8 years.
John Lord, thank you so much for talking to me.
Pleasure to be here, Ticky. Thank you.
After the break, a new deal for Australian small cap Fluence CEO Henry Charrabé next.
Now, back to Ticky.
Welcome back. Now to something a little bit different. Water. ASX-listed water treatment provider Fluence has been awarded a $261 million contract to supply the Ivory Coast government, yes, in Africa, with a 150,000 cubic metre per day surface water treatment plant. Well, for more on what this means for investors, Fluence CEO Henry Charrabé is joining me at the desk. Henry, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, this is actually a very big deal for Fluence, because what's the market cap?
About 200 million Aussie right now.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a big story. Tell me, what should investors think? How should investors see it?
Well, I think this is one of the great examples as Fluence has many shots on goal. We focus globally on decentralized smart products and water and wastewater, but yet have the expertise to do a deal like this in Ivory Coast, where we're going to treat 150,000 cubic meters of fresh water from a lagoon into the water treatment system of Ivory Coast, for the largest city of Abidjan, getting water for up to 1.5 million people.
Okay, how secure is this deal? I mean, how far have you got? What backing have you got? All that.
So we got to financial close, to commercial signing last week. We're working on a financial close.
Yeah, the shares jumped, didn't they, when you announced it?
They did, yeah. and of course we're working on the financial close now, which is very nice because it's backed by the Export Credit Institution of Israel, ASHRA, to make sure that there's no political risk and no collection risk for us to work in Ivory Coast, which is one of the greatest countries to work in at Western Africa.
So, I mean, for those that don't know West Africa, how would you rate Ivory Coast in terms of political risk? I
would rate it very low. We have had very good experiences there. They have very good rapport and financial standing with the IMF. Their credit rating is pretty strong. And so the Israeli Credit Expert Institute, ASHRA, is giving us support for this deal. So this, again, is another sentiment of how lucky we are to get this deal and working through it.
Again, for people who don't know Fluence, it's ASX listed, but that is the history of what, two companies combining, one of which was Israeli, which ended up listing here, as some of these Israeli stocks have done, yeah?
Correct. So in July 2017, the ASX-listed company MFC and the company that I was running called RWL Water, which was owned by Ambassador Ronald Lauder, merged and became Fluence.
As in Estee Lauder?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And so we merged the two entities, and we're now, I think, the #1 company globally focused on the decentralized water and wastewater treatment market.
Right. So where should investors see growth? I mean, obviously you've got this big lump of a thing, and presumably you're employing people locally, are you?
Yes, also locally, of course.
Okay, so in terms of growth going forward, you've got this project. Where does the revenue growth come from?
So the biggest growth, I think, is going to come from our smart product solutions. We have decentralized smart package systems, both for wastewater treatment, for rural wastewater sewage, and our NeoBox for seawater desalination. And then the second area where we see tremendous growth is where we offer project finance to our customers. So recurring revenue over years where the customer pays per cubic meter of treated water, like water as a service, rather than a large upfront payment in the decentralized distributed space.
Where do you see your most exciting markets?
So the biggest growth market for us is probably in the wastewater space in China, based on the Chinese central government's demanded 13th five-year plan that intends to increase rural wastewater from 10% currently to 70%.
Yes.
That's a huge opportunity for us. Desalination is an opportunity anywhere in any coastal area around the world.
And your track record, once again, you've got this huge deal. What's your track record of being able to build something of this size?
So we've built other large plants. The largest to date is for an oil and gas company in Colombia. We've built large plants in Cyprus, 50,000 cubic meter for desalination. So we know how to do...
But not here in Australia, even though you're ASX listed. Why is that?
The opportunity in Australia hasn't presented itself yet, in the same way it's presented itself outside of Australia.
What, because the returns are better?
No, because so Australia is a very sophisticated market. And for us to invest marketing dollars, we obviously want to have a fast return on our investment for our shareholders. And Australia is so much more advanced and enhanced in that the decentralized approach hasn't really arrived here yet.
All right, and third quarter, what happens in the third quarter this year?
Well, in the third quarter, we hopefully get to financial close and therefore start the project with notice to proceed.
Yeah, great. Come back and talk to me in the third quarter. I'd really enjoy that.
I'd love to.
Thank you very much, Henry Charrabé. Thank you. And that's all for the show tonight. Tomorrow night, my interview with super expert and former superannuation minister Nick Sherry. Thanks for your company.